This is my TED Talk on deterministic versus emergent design. The main difference between deterministic and emergent design is the outcome. So for example, in deterministic design, the outcome is known, whereas in emergent design, the outcome is not known. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about deterministic design. Deterministic design is a performance-based model based on the learning outcomes. The learning outcomes are identified based on who the audience is and what their performance levels are. In deterministic design, you are working backwards. So in this design, you're starting with the learning outcomes. Then you move on to the conditions of learning, which include intellectual, or knowing how to do something, verbal, which is being able to state ideas, cognitive, which is where the learners are able to guide their learning and to have a way of analyzing problems, motor, or conducting movements, and attitude, which is a mental state that influences personal actions. And these are all great for a traditional learning environment. Next, we move on to the events of instruction. And here I have attached Bloom's taxonomy. And here you can see the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So first we have remembering, which is recalling facts and basic concepts, or in other words, defining, duplicating, listing, memorizing, repeating, and stating. Next we have understanding, or explaining ideas or concepts. In other words, classifying, describing, discussing, explaining, identifying, locating, recognizing, reporting, selecting, and translating. Next, we have applying, which is using information in new situations. In other words, implementing, solving, executing, using, demonstrating, etc. Next, we have analyzing, which is drawing connections among ideas. In other words, differentiating, organizing, relating, comparing, contrasting, distinguishing, examining, experimenting, questioning, and testing. Next, we have evaluating, which is justifying a stand or decision. In other words, arguing, defending, judging, selecting, etc. And finally, we have creating, which is producing new or original work. In other words, designing, assembling, constructing, developing, and so on. So in deterministic design, you're building backwards. So the idea is to work from the outcome. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about emergent design. And in emergent design, the outcome is unknown. Emergent design can display different behaviors even with the same input. In emergent design, the audience is unknown, as opposed to deterministic design, where the learning outcomes are identified based on who the audience is. The adjacent possible also goes along with emergent design, and what the adjacent possible does is that it gives the audience the best possible way through the gap. And finally, we have the state model, which is also a part of emergent design. And in this model, you're working from the moment. The pacing is based on student performance. It can be time-consuming, and it's based on micro-assessments. So that's my little presentation on the differences between deterministic and emergent designs. So after putting together this little presentation, I now have a better understanding of the differences between deterministic and emergent design. I think the one I understood the most about was the deterministic design. I feel like I could relate to that one more, and I connected more with the deterministic design than I did with the emergent design. So that is the end of my TED Talk. Thank you so much for listening.